All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamoda and Danny Abdeljabbar. On today's show, we're joined by Scott Horton. Scott is the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of Antiwar.com, and the host of the Scott Horton Show. Everyone, you need to be listening to the Scott Horton Show. In my opinion, it is the best podcast on foreign policy out there. Scott also is the author of two books, Fool's Errand, which is really just an incredible book on Afghanistan. It's where I get most of my talking points on Afghanistan right from that book. And then Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism, which was published earlier this year. And everyone listening right now, this book, I feel like this is a real major accomplishment, and it's really worth your time to read this. And when I was getting started in foreign policy, or when I was starting to get interested in foreign policy, I wish this book had been available, because it catches you up on everything you need to know. And it's a relatively easy read. Like, you're going to finish it within like a week or so. And it's not like cuckoo crazy stuff or topics that are so esoteric that you have to be a huge dork to be interested in. It really paints the narrative of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. And, it's using stories that most people are already aware of. So it's really just tying these events together and making sense out of them. But I guess more importantly, Scott really just he exposes the roots of all these wars and like who are the main drivers behind them. Scott, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Henry. And it's great to be here. And thank you for saying that. That's exactly what I was going for with the book. Here's the story you already know, but let's just see if we can make sense out of it in one line through from Jimmy Carter to right now and make it make sense. And I think, I'm glad to hear you say that it does.
Yeah, well, I really mean that when I said I wish that book was available when I first started getting really interested in foreign policy and the U.S. wars in the Middle East, because it just would have saved me a lot of headache and time kind of looking at the wrong sources.
It was supposed to be out like 6 years ago, so sorry about that.
Well, it's better late than never. But I wish I had this book, back in like 2012 or 2011 when my brain was developed enough to handle it. Because, you're taking things like, hey, the Iran hostage crisis, everyone knows what that is. Everyone knows what Rambo 3 is and the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Like, people know what the Iraq war is, so people have some level of familiarity. It's not like you're tackling some super esoteric, weird thing that you have to have some real special interest to appreciate. You're not going into like deep Islamic thoughts or something like that, or just something so exotic and foreign and it wouldn't make sense for the reader. You're just tying, our lifetime foreign policy all together in a cohesive narrative, and that's why I think it's just so valuable, and that people, if you haven't read it already, you should immediately buy Enough Already.
Cool, man. Appreciate that. And yeah, I've been really grateful for all the word of mouth and all the kind of reaction to it. I don't see people too excited about a new book coming out very much, but well, people seem to really react to it like they're getting something out of it. They want their buddy to read it. They want their father-in-law to read it, or that kind of thing. So pretty happy.
Well, what I did with my future father-in-law, I planted a Fool's Errand book inside their house, hoping he would find it. So I didn't directly give it to him. I just planted it on the coffee table. So we'll see what happens. See if he finds it and reads it.
I was going to say, Henry also put me onto your YouTube playlist of all of the chapters and stuff like that. I think that's a really great way to get into it, because I haven't actually picked it up yet, but just that alone, really high production quality. And I wanted to ask you about all those screens that you had in the background. I think you might have me beat for having more screens.
Yeah. So that's this great documentary filmmaker named Gus Cantivero. He came and we just shot that all in one day.
Wow.
And he just said, look, he's kind of after me for a while. Like, you working on those scripts? And don't worry about scripts, man. We don't need scripts. We're just going to knock this thing out. It's going to be fine, And then, yeah, we just kind of went through it where I was sitting right here, only facing that way. Mm-hmm. And he just sat here and filmed me, and we just went through it. step by step, and then he's got 2 cameras, so he's going through and splicing the different angles together and stuff. Yeah. And then it's like comes to the footnotes, and then I just do my thing, which is send him a million links, and then he's got to figure out where to put them and get them in the right spots and whatever, and all that. But I
was really impressed with all the stuff, like the maps and things like that. Like those are super cool.
Yeah. No, you said the maps. You said.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do that for our show too, like kind of show a map with like a little like arrow, and it's like here's where they're going,
Yeah. No, he does a lot of good ones of those, but I'm trying to remember if he shows. I think he does show the ethnic and religious maps of the region. I got those. I have those in the book, and they're on the websites for both books. At enoughAlready.net or enoughAlreadybook.net. And foolserrand.us. They have the maps there. And I got those from this guy named Michael Azadi, who's a professor at Columbia University. And he just goes through and does like the most in-depth, color-coded maps of, the whole region. Go look at his website. It's incredible. He's got all the different stuff he's got. But he's got, the full ethnic and sectarian maps of like everything from Egypt to Pakistan, right? Like all the entire, what you could call the Middle East broadly defined. He's got it all in there. And then also like the demographic changes in Baghdad as America helped the Shiites kick all the Sunni Arabs out during Iraq War II. And then you can see the change year by year by year as the city becomes a virtually entirely Shiite city.
That's awesome. Kind of thing. That's awesome. Yeah. Maps and data like that are just like, I'm a nerd for stuff like that. So I'm going to have to check that out, and maybe I'll lift it for the show.
Yeah, do it, man. Yeah, splice that in there. If you just go to enoughAlreadybook.net, and I know for a fact at foolserrand.us that they're all available there.
Cool, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
So never has there been a book that I like so much, made me so angry. I don't know how much you're getting that as a reaction, but like I'm listening to this, I'm reading this book, and all of a sudden, like, I'll just be like, those bastards out loud. And then my fiance will be like, who are you yelling at? And I'm like, I'm yelling at Scott Horton's book. Bush let him get away at Tora Bora. And she's like, what are you talking about? That's kind of been funny. What was kind of a reoccurring theme as I was reading through it. There's a lot of invoking of anger. So I don't know how.
No, listen. So right now, I just finished. I recorded most of it earlier in the spring, but I'm just going through. I finished finally a couple of weeks ago, recording the last bit of it, and now I'm going through and editing the audiobook, which is just me reading my own book out loud. And then, it makes me madder than hell too. So here I am, not just reading it out loud. Now I'm sitting here listening to myself reading it out loud. Oh, and it's W. Bush is the worst of them all, but Barack Obama too, and the generals, David Petraeus, and it's funny because one of the I guess the last comment on Fool's Errand on Amazon.com is full of facts and vitriol, and he complains that I'm like trying to make you so mad, and that I'm talking so much smack against the people I'm finding guilty here. And I take the criticism. Like if that's not what you were looking for, I could see how it's just a bit much. But at the same time, I mean, my book is about, to boil it down to one of its major themes, it's about how America's still backing Al Qaeda. And has almost this whole time, where their war against us and our war against them, as it took place in the 90s and 2000s, where that's just the aberration. We're mostly from Jimmy Carter through right now. America still backs these guys. And it's pretty infuriating. I mean, especially when you look at like the war in Syria. I mean, to think that the war in Syria could have happened the way it happened after Iraq War II. After we'd already been through Iraq War II, for them to go on to Libya and Syria, for this to be a dimension where that was even possible at all, where the American people didn't all, see it in Washington, D.C. and go and stop that from happening. It's madness. USA backing the suicide bombers after they've done it to us already. You think it's funny when they're just blowing up people overseas somewhere. They come and kill 3,000 of our people. We're supposed to get it now that, okay, well, we don't want to back suicide bombers anymore, at least. But no. And it is. It's absolutely maddening. And it's because there's no accountability. And so therefore they continue on doing things that are absolutely infuriating. It's crazy. And as you said at the beginning, it's not a conspiracy theory book, right? This is not the kind of thing where, like, if you believe me, then that's pretty bad. Like, no, you don't have to believe me. It's all true. It's all in there, and it's all, what's not, delineated in its source material is plenty searchable and provable,
Yeah.
I guess the one conspiracy theory, I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory, but I guess the one point that you make, I agree with this point, by the way, but when you claim that Bush intentionally let bin Laden escape to Pakistan at Tora Bora.
And I do admit that's a circumstantial case, a speculative case, but a pretty good one, I think.
No, I think it's a really good one. And the only defense that I hear, I was listening to, I think Michael Scheuer on like an old episode of probably like 10 years ago or so. And you were asking him about it. And his defense was, he was like, did they let him go? And he's like, no, it's all the lawyers. It's just the lawyers, and all these decisions are made by law, and that's it. And I feel like you'd be kind of blunt about that, but I feel that's kind of the defense of a lot of weird, complicated things. Like, oh, it's just the lawyers in Washington. Like, that's why our foreign policy, or that's why we couldn't do that. That's why we let bin Laden escape to Pakistan when we had the military assets to capture him, or at the very least riddle him with bullets.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a plausible deniability kind of thing where you can always plug that in wherever you want. But look, these men at that time, George Bush and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and George Tenet, they were canceling every law in the book. They were canceling the whole Constitution in the name of the Commander-in-Chief Clause. Overrides all. This president can torture people to death. And there's no law, there's no treaty, there's no part of the Constitution that can stop him from doing it. That was their theory at the time. And then they say, oh, yeah, no, some Air Force JAG said we couldn't kill the greatest enemy this country's had since Tojo. Come on. It's David Addington. Is that the lawyer we're talking about? Dick Cheney's man said we can't do it. I don't believe that. Some lawyer at the Pentagon said that? Well, why didn't they ask David Addington? David Addington says we could torture people to death. David Addington says the President of the United States can do anything. So, and then they hide behind, well, we didn't want to stir up some Pakistani tribal chiefs or whatever. Well, why the hell not? I'm supposed to believe they cared about that? And see, here's the thing, man. In a way, there's something to it. We're like, once a decision has been made, now you're innocent for going along with it. So they had decided on a strategy, which, come on, man, this is wink, nudge, BS. But they had decided officially to focus on the Taliban and regime change. And that getting al-Qaeda was important too. But as Bush said, hey, as long as bin Laden's on the run, then that's good enough for me. And that's not the mission. Getting bin Laden was not the mission. In fact, I wish I'd had this quote in the book. I only recently saw it. It's in the movie 9/11 Press for Truth. There's a clip of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Richard Myers, saying the goal was never to get bin Laden. And I have a quote from, that's a direct quote from Meet the Press. And there's a thing from this last, I guess, February, it could be January still, in reaction to the January 6th riot at the Capitol. NPR News interviewed Robert Grenier. Who's Robert Grenier? Was a former CIA officer who used to be the station chief in Islamabad. And part of my case for them deliberately letting Osama bin Laden go is that Robert Grenier had already worked out deconfliction with the Pakistani Army and Frontier Corps, that when bin Laden, when and if he flees across the border into Pakistan, and we expect the Delta Force to be hot on his heels, that we want to protect from friendly fire. So we have a deconfliction line already set up. Robert Grenier, at least in his book, he claims he had done his job and had set up a deconfliction line. And then he makes excuses for bin Laden getting away. Well, I don't know, he took the wrong valley or some kind of thing. I forgot his excuse. He doesn't buy in the book that they let him get away either. But he's, to me, part of the case that they did, if you take his word for it on that. But anyway, so this same guy, who in other words had this peripheral role in the hunt for bin Laden at the time, he is interviewed on NPR News about January 6th. And he's making this horrible analogy, and we'll get to the analogy in a second. But to set up for the analogy, he explains to the NPR News reporter, he says, you know, in the war on terrorism, we could have focused directly on bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. But he doesn't use the word wisely, but he's clearly like agreeing that this was the smart thing to do, the way he describes it. And he says, but we decided we wanted to focus more on kind of this broader milieu of extremism in which Al-Qaeda was thriving. And that meant the Taliban. Well, this is the parentheses for the sake of our discussion. In his analogy, the January 6th rioters were Al-Qaeda. And the broader milieu of the Taliban that they want to focus on, that are the real enemy of the new domestic war on terrorism, well, that's just the American right wing. That's everybody to the right of the center, is the Taliban. And, you know, this is the mindset of these freaks in Washington, D.C. But anyway, go back to set up for the analogy. We could have gone after the guilty. This organization of 400 Arab, Saudis, and Egyptians hiding in Afghanistan, bin Laden and his closest friends and associates and their bodyguards and hangers-on, you know, Chechen militiamen or whatever. And we could have just flattened them flat. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to go after the Taliban in Kabul. And they'll just tell you. So in other words, maybe where I go wrong in the book is I sort of imply, or I don't fill in the space correctly, and so it sort of seems like I'm saying like they had this whisper conversation, like, oh, let's let them go. But it's more like, no, they said, look, getting bin Laden's not the goal, right, everybody? Right.
That's insane.
So then now it's not like a secret weird conspiracy, right? This is the policy that they decided. Mm-hmm. And so much of this is in Bob Woodward's book, Bush at War. And, you know, Bush told the White House staff, give everything to Bob, good old Bob, you know, court historian, Washington Post guy. We like him. We trust him. And who wants to go through the trouble of deciding what to tell him? Just give him everything. And everybody has permission to talk to him. So we got all kinds of interviews with these kooks. Of course, they're all pointing the fingers at each other, but which is fine. And there's some honesty and some dishonesty there. It's nice to hear at least their accusations on the first-hand basis. But they also just gave them the National Security Council minutes. So they have in there direct quotes from the minutes, from the note takers, from the meetings, where Rumsfeld is saying, and Bush is agreeing, especially the two of them, that, look, man, if we get bin Laden, that's not victory. And if we fail to get bin Laden, that's not failure. And this war is a big, broad, wide, giant thing. And we got to make sure the American people recognize. Rumsfeld says maybe we should start bombing Baghdad right now, just so the American people understand. This war is not to be isolated to Tora Bora in Nangarhar province, getting those that got us. That's not what it is. It's everything we want to do from now on. It's Paul Wolfowitz's entire agenda for Greater Israel and whatever you got. Now we're going to do whatever we want. And we're going to use, this, travesty and tragedy as an excuse to do it. And, lately I've been trying to give credit to the 9/11 truthers, that as much of a distraction as all that was, and as bad as most of that their reasoning has been, that ultimately you got to hand it to them. George Bush and Dick Cheney might as well have done it. What difference at this point does it make, as Hillary Clinton would say, whether W. Bush actually did 9/11 himself, which I'm not saying that he did, but I'm just saying he killed 1 million people in their name. He exploited the grief and the fear of those survivors and the rest of the country in order to get away with attacking a bunch of people who never done anything to us at all, who didn't threaten us in any way at all. And then, as I document in the book, starting with W. Bush and then continuing through Obama and through this to this day, I took the side of al-Qaeda in Libya, Syria, and Yemen. And in Syria and Yemen to this day, America, through the Turks, backs al-Qaeda in the Idlib province in Syria and backs al-Qaeda, which is AKA UAE's militia on the ground in the war in Yemen, fighting against the Houthis. To this day, it's the highest treason. You can't make this stuff up. And so why wouldn't they have done it? Right? If they had had the opportunity to do it themselves, if they could get away with this, they would have, apparently.
Do you think that it relates to, I was watching your videos earlier, and you were talking about in one of your chapters how during the Operation Desert Storm, they were able to get rid of the Vietnam syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. And they had this, idea that, America's back and, we have the ability to run these quick, effective operations, and we're going to have this, New World Order doctrine about how we're going to run NATO's, bidding or the Security Council's, decisions, and we're going to enforce them all. Do you think that getting rid of that Vietnam syndrome early on in Desert Storm helped us to be able to parlay the tragedy of 9/11 into, the broader, more recent war on terror?
Yeah. And I think that this is part of their excuse for letting bin Laden escape too, was, well, we just want to keep it light and fast. In fact, some of them would invoke the kind of lessons that I'm talking about in the book, that they saw that bin Laden was trying to get us to repeat the Russians' mistake. This is something that Rumsfeld, I think, specifically invoked, that we don't want to get bogged down like the Russians here. That's what they're trying to get us to do, and we're smarter than that. So we want to stay light and fast and air power. But then, come on, how light and fast are we talking when you send in Delta Force Team B, but you pull out Team A when they get there? Mm-hmm. Like, we can't even have 2 teams of Delta Force guys? That's really light and fast.
As compared to all the people we sent there in the first place, right?
Yeah,
over
yeah,
the last
exactly.
20 years.
Yeah. I mean, and even in December 01, we got Rangers in Bagram Air Base. We got Green Berets up in Mazar-i Sharif, and we got more Rangers and Marines down in Kandahar province. And we got Delta Force and CIA paramilitaries at Tora Bora begging for reinforcements and being told no for weeks. And that's the thing of it. When I rely heavily on these books, Jawbreaker by Gary Bernson and Kill Bin Laden by Thomas Greer. And that's the CIA commander on scene and the Delta Force commander on scene during this.
No, that's Dalton Fury's Dalton Fury. Alias. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's Thomas Greer, is AKA Dalton Fury. And people can watch him on 60 Minutes talking about all this too. But basically, these guys say over and over again, they're beating you over the head with it. They go, we just couldn't understand why they wouldn't give us the reinforcements that we needed. And it's like, come on. Yeah, we did too understand. You see what's going on there. They had to make a show of like, hey, we did drop some bombs. We took the risk that we might have got bin Laden. We had a demonstration, but they clearly were not trying to devote whatever was necessary to getting the guilty. They just weren't. And, just to belabor the point a little bit, why couldn't our troops have just followed them into Pakistan? Let's say our guys are so busy invading Somalia right now that we can't spare anyone else to follow bin Laden into Pakistan. Fine, why not send the Delta Force guys that you have? Why not let them give chase? And the way they always talk about this, almost always, and I'm sure you've all heard this, your audience has heard this a million times, well, he slipped across the border into Pakistan. And then you're just supposed to make up the rest of the story yourself. You're just supposed to have to say to yourself, well, I guess they couldn't follow him into Pakistan.
Johnson, they got away.
You know? Yeah, like there must be like a big waterfall or something that, you know.
He disappeared behind or something.
Yeah. They, I always thought of like, and, you know, I asked my mom, because my mom loved old movies, and I was trying to get her to think of a good example of this so I could cite it specifically. And it wasn't Smokey and the Bandit. I don't know what the hell it was, but there's some scene from some old movie or some old TV show, which I thought was a cliche, like had happened a lot of times. Usually people seem to know what I'm talking about, but I can't find any examples of it. But anyway, it's when the bank robber successfully crosses the county line or the state line, and the sheriff has to come to a screeching halt, and gets out of the car and he throws his hat on the ground and stomps on it.
Yeah.
And goes, Sergeant, you know, something like that. Or, you know, another great analogy is they jumped into hyperspace.
Right.
And I'm sorry, my lord, they could be on the other side of the galaxy by now. I don't know what to tell you. You know, they got away.
It's like Han Solo escaping Stormtroopers and from Tatooine.
Yeah, exactly. But so in this case, though, what are we talking about? We're talking about our elite Stormtroopers chasing after some sand people in flip-flops on the ground. And they're on their way where? They didn't cross the border into Russia or China.
Right.
Well, listen, Henry, if you said to me, but Scott, they crossed into Russia. We can't send our troops across the border into Russia. I would say to you, Henry, you make a great point. But that's not what happened here. They went to Pakistan. And Pakistan's a friendly country. And America, the only reason that they backed the Taliban is because America told them to in the Bill Clinton years. And after September 11th, the Deputy Secretary of State, Dick Armitage, called Pervez Musharraf, the dictator, the military dictator of Pakistan, and said, you're going to do everything we say, or we're going to reduce your country to the Stone Age. We will, in other words, we will use H-bombs on you. You now are in our service. And Pervez Musharraf said, of course, sire, what would you have us do, my lord? And completely put Pakistan in the service of the United States government, especially now. You want to say they started backing the Afghan Taliban against us in 2004? Fine. But that's not what we're talking about here. And Robert Grenay writes in his book, again, that they were completely cooperative in every way with his attempt to set up deconfliction to prevent friendly fire. So in other words, they might as well have crossed from Louisiana into Texas. And okay, so fine, the state troopers can't follow them, but the FBI can. The Delta Force sure as hell can. Makes no difference. And again, you know, their excuses are so shoddy. And I can hear, you know, I had forgotten what you say there, quoting Michael Scheuer. I could imagine him saying that. And I could maybe even imagine.
I was paraphrasing him, but he said something along the lines, "It's all lawyers and stuff like that."
Yeah. No, I totally could hear him say that.
Malice.
And, you know, there may be something to that, but look, how come Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Tenet didn't override those lawyers and say we're doing it anyway? I mean, these are guys who tortured people to death. These are guys who started wars against countries that didn't attack us whatsoever. At the same time, they let bin Laden go. They're sending the Delta Force to Somalia to hunt a couple guys on the FBI's wanted list from the Cole attack and the embassy attack. You know, so they weren't worried about. They have a declaration of war against Somalia. They have authorization for that, or they do whatever they want. You know, and you know, Gareth Porter one time did an interview with an Army colonel, I guess, who explained, like, no, man, we were really worried about stirring up some of the local tribal people in Pakistan there. Well, I just don't believe that they were worried about that. What the hell do they care if some local Pakistani sheep herders, I care, but what the hell do they care if some local Pakistani sheep herders want to throw themselves between the Delta Force and Osama bin Laden? Bad call, brother. You know, we're here hunting a 6.5-foot Arab. You stay the hell out of our way and we won't have a problem. This is the American military we're talking about here. These guys are bullies par excellence. They're not going to not go after their top quarry that you could possibly imagine because of some local Pakistani tribesmen, when nobody thought the plan was to stay in Pakistan. Nobody was saying that, oh, yeah, no, because these stirred up Pakistani tribesmen are going to be a real problem for us in the future. They were going to be occupying Western Pakistan. That was never the plan. We're talking about hot pursuit here. That's all. And the fact that, you know, and by the way, in the New York Times last week, they had one where, well, what happened was bin Laden, he melted across the border. Usually he slips across the border. I guess this guy, he's made of butter. He's very slippery and melty, and he just, you know, the guy's smooth. Walking on, you know, he's on horseback or on foot, you know, walking across.
Scott,
can you imagine Donald Rumsfeld saying, "Sorry guys, we can't violate the integrity of the property rights of these Pakistani farmers or goat herders. We cannot violate the indigenous people there. They have been unmolested for centuries. We can't do that."
Right, yeah. Like it'd be breaking the fourth wall on some Amazonian tribe, you know, that is isolated from the rest of humanity. Oh, we don't want to show them technology, or, you know.
But yeah, it sounds like complete horseshit. And I mean, they could have just paid him, right? Like they couldn't just be like, oh, sorry, we had to, you know, run through here and catch bin Laden. Here's $100,000.
Sure. Look, and or, you know, maybe they would have taken the money and not handed him over. Did I lose you? You're frozen on me there.
Yeah, he looks a little bit frozen. Keep going. We'll get him.
Okay. I mean, you know, even if you don't trust that, but still, just send the CIA paramilitaries and the Delta Force to do it. And if you watch that, you know, read the book, but if you just watch Dalton Fury, a.k.a., or that's the pen name for the alias for Thomas Greer, watch his interview on 60 Minutes. And here he's telling Scott Pelley, like, yeah, man, it sucked. We wanted to go. And they wouldn't let us go. We were going to kill them this way, and we were going to kill them that way. We were going to take Chinooks and fly over the mountains and then come from the east and get them. Aha, what you going to do now, Osama? We are going to drop a bunch of mines. They only had 3 valleys to choose from to get out of there. We were going to mine them from the air. Mm-hmm. That'll slow them down, and then we'll be able to find them and shoot them and kill them. Let me at them, Uncle Scooby. These guys are the Delta Force. And I'm not saying like, oh, yeah, put their lives at needless risk. But they weren't saying, put my life at needless risk. They were saying, let me do my job, which, yes, entails some risk, but I'm happy to do that, being a Delta Force guy.
And they had a plan.
After Osama bin Laden, you know. And as Greer says in that interview, he goes, man, what target could possibly be more important for the war on terrorism than to get bin Laden? You can tell he's like essentially, you know, same with Bernsen. They're like beside themselves that they can't get the authority to finish the job on that. In fact, you know, Greer says when you're Delta Force in the field, this is top tier, you know, them and SEAL Team 6 and, you know, 75th Rangers. These are the very top tier special operations forces. When Delta Force is in the field and they radio back that they want permission to do this or that, the answer is always yes. And we're talking about on a tactical level, right? Mm-hmm. Not like we just made up a new mission for ourselves, but we want to go east and then north. The answer is always yes, right? And yet in this case, the answer was always no. And he's just like, look, I don't know what to tell you. When you're in Delta Force, the answer is yes. We want to do this. Hey, you guys do your worst out there, buddy. That's always the answer. Except this one time.
It's very telling.
When it's killing bin Laden and Zawahiri. Mm-hmm. And now the answer is, no, I'm so sorry. We're not going to be able to give you permission to do the thing that you want to do to kill these most killable men. You know?
Very telling. Very, very telling.
I mean, here's the thing, man. Like, everything was written down, man. If you just read the things that were written by PNAC and the Neoconservatives, it's not like they were secretive about what they wanted and what their plans were and what they wanted to do with the Middle East and what their goals were with the military and what they were trying to achieve. They wrote it down. So it's not like people are making up some crazy conspiracy. So it's not a surprise they wanted to extend that war to Iraq.
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right. And when you talk about, the Project for a New American Century, that doctrine that they outlay in rebuilding America's defenses, it's the same doctrine that they put in the Defense Plan and Guidance in 1992, which was the official Pentagon plan for American dominance. And then that became the national security strategy of the United States in 2002 under W. Bush. It became the official national security strategy. And you're right, they couldn't be more clear about it. The policy is complete and total American military dominance forever. And in order to keep the peace in the world, we are going to prevent any power or group of powers from ever even being able to consider the idea that they would challenge America's military dominance in their country, on their continent, in their region, their hemisphere, on Earth. That's it. We win. Don't even try it. And that's how we're going to lord it over everybody. And then, so part of the Middle Eastern doctrine, if you exclude, Likud party interests for the moment, the American interest in dominating the Middle East, it's not so much about stealing that oil for the money, although Exxon and their friends get to make a pretty penny. But it's
that's important because that's the left-wing narrative on that's the anti-war left in the early 2000s. That was the narrative. I think that's why so many people were turned off from it. Like, oh well, we could
war for oil, war for oil.
So I think that messaging wasn't correct.
But see, the thing of it is, it's a pretty powerful optical illusion. There's a hell of a lot of oil and a hell of a lot of money in that region.
Right.
So the conflicts of interest are legion. But no, you're right. I mean, the reality is the primary reason for that war was because of the Likud party interests and therefore the neoconservatives' interests in the United States to, attempt to create a friendly situation that would guarantee Israeli dominance. But as far as the oil goes, it's not so much about stealing the money as it is about being able to lord it over East Asia, being able to lord it over our frenemies, the Chinese, the event, as though the U.S. Navy can't just shut down all shipping anywhere in the world that they feel like anyway. But this is the thinking, is that this is this important choke point. And so in the event of a conflict with China, we can lord it over them. But even in peacetime, we can lord it over them, but also our friends, the Indians, the Koreans, the Japanese, the Australians, the Indonesians. All these people are running off of Middle Eastern oil. And so if we're the dominant force in the Middle East, that, helps to prop up our policy of dominance throughout the world. And so, that's the whole thing of it. It's when they say full spectrum dominance, that's what they're talking about. They want the government in Turkmenistan to have to think, oh, well, what are the Americans going to say about whatever it is that they do? Same thing in Outer Mongolia. Same thing everywhere. With no exceptions. It's got to be, every river and every stream and every, sea on the planet has to be considered American property and all the land in between. So
I feel like the U.S. would try to dominate the sun if we all started moving to like solar energy or something like that.
Yeah, seriously. Or like the moon. Like you couldn't really count on these guys to say, hey, like let's all have really cool paper agreements to have international control and no, single nations, claim on the moon. Mm-hmm. I could see them fighting a war over it. I could see them fighting a war on the damn moon, trying to keep other nation states off of it or whatever, instead of figuring out a better way to work it out. And what a great way to waste money on that. You know what I mean?
Reminds me of the show on Apple TV For All Mankind. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's an alternate history show where the Soviets beat us to the moon. And yeah, it's super interesting, very fascinating. I think you'd like it. But, in the later seasons, they're all on the moon. And let's just say some conflict happens.
Yeah.
And we shot first. Spoiler alert.
Right. Yeah, always. So, and then, look, let's talk about the Israeli angle here. It's not a coincidence that the neoconservatives are all hardcore Zionists. And they're not all Jewish, but they are all very, very Zionist. And their movement essentially comes from the radical left. Most of them were Trotskyite communists who then sided with America in the Cold War because they were Americans and because the Stalinists beat the Trotskyites for control of the USSR. So that was convenient for them. But then they moved to the right because of Vietnam and civil rights. And they didn't want anything to do with the new left anti-war movement or the pro-black civil rights movement of the 1960s. So they started moving to the right. And they essentially, the generation was shifting here too. But these are the people who populated the National Review and Commentary magazine, and who studied under Leo Strauss, and then went and worked for Scoop Jackson, who was the senator from Boeing. They called him the senator from Washington State. And then they became Reaganites. And a bunch of them, went to work for Ronald Reagan. And, they essentially moved to the right in the 1970s. And then so you have, this major kind of effort to ally with the military-industrial complex and to take over the major foundations. So the Bradley, Olin, and Scaife foundations were really important. And in, I guess, the early 1990s, they founded the Weekly Standard magazine to go along with the National Review. And, essentially, so you have, by the time of the W. Bush years, by the time of the Bush senior years, these guys are essentially excluded from Middle East policy. And Bush Sr. had, Brent Scowcroft, his national security advisor. His job is said to have been to keep the crazies in the basement, which meant that they're allowed to kill people in Latin America, but they're not allowed to mess with Middle Eastern policy, keep them away from Middle Eastern policy. So that's why you hear about Elliot Abrams and all these guys being caught up in Iran-Contra. It's because they were being kept away from Israel and Middle Eastern issues. But then, so W. Bush and Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld hire them all. So when you talk about rebuilding America's defenses, or you mentioned PNAC, and that was their big, study that they put out. They had all these.
It's a very creepy paper.
Yeah,
they have some very creepy stuff about like targeting people by genome and stuff like that. It's very weird.
Well, I mean, they're essentially bringing that up as a scare story, as something we have to defend against.
Yeah.
Is the context there, but it's they're throwing all the spaghetti at the wall to say, this is why we need to increase American defense spending. And you could look at it as nothing but a brochure for Lockheed products. They made their this massive alliance with Bruce Jackson from Lockheed, who also helped to finance the Weekly Standard and to help finance PNAC and also the Committee for NATO Expansion and later the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq. And the guy was clearly just selling airplanes. I mean, the whole thing was just essentially a ruse from their point of view. But then there are some key members of the neoconservative movement in the 1990s, Richard Pearl and David Wormser and Douglas Feith, who wrote this paper for Benjamin Netanyahu when he was first becoming the prime minister the first time in 1996. And it's called A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm. And there's two follow-ups, Coping with Crumbling States, and then the book, Tyranny's Ally. And they all say the same thing, essentially. And the idea is this. And it's completely crazy, so if it sounds crazy to you, that's because it's crazy, okay? It might even be a little confusing, but try to picture the map of the Middle East here and the way it's all set up. Their theory was, if we overthrow Saddam Hussein, then Jordan will take over Baghdad. And the king of Jordan, he's a Hashemite king, he will take over, or his cousin, they shifted the way that they talked about it, will become the king of the Iraqis, and it'd be great.
Wait, that is just such an insane thing. The Shias don't even recognize the Hashemites as the stewards of Mecca. Like, they are not that.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point.
Between the Sunnis and Shia had to do with the lineage of Muhammad.
Right. But that's exactly.
But how did they not know that?
Well, because
or
what they did was, they knew it, but they got it all mixed up, right? And what happened was, it was Ahmed Chalabi who told them that, don't worry, the Shiites love bending over and taking orders from anyone who claims to have the blood of Muhammad. And Wormser didn't understand the difference. That no, the Shiites revere, certain family lines from Muhammad, but not anyone who claims to be descended from Muhammad, and certainly not the Hashemites. And in fact, when the Hashemite king had been foisted on them by the British in a previous era, the Shiite clergy had issued a fatwa against him and forbidding any Iraqi from cooperating with the government, and which helped lead to his downfall. So, in other words, you are totally right to object right off the bat that, yeah, but Scott, in Iraq, the Shiites are the super majority. What's going to happen with that? Yeah, exactly. Except these guys are idiots, Henry. And so they didn't come up with that objection at all. Ahmed Chalabi said, don't worry. What'll happen is the Shiites will do whatever they're told. And what we'll do then is, and here's where it gets, really ridiculous. What we'll do is we'll have our new Hashemite king will instruct the Shiite clergy in Najaf to instruct Hezbollah in Lebanon to stop being friends with Iran, to start being friends with Israel. And then Turkey and Jordan and Israel will be dominant, and Syria and Hezbollah will be tamed, and Syria will be left out in the cold, and Iran isolated on the far eastern periphery of the region there. Now, this is completely stupid and crazy and wrong, but this is what these extremely important neoconservatives have let themselves be convinced of by Chalabi. So obviously Bush wanted to do it, right? Rumsfeld wanted to do it. Cheney wanted to do it. But then they all turned to Wolfowitz, and Wolfowitz says, yeah, we game this out. It's going to be great. Trust us eggheads. We already went through how it's going to shake out in the new Iraqi order, and it's going to be wonderful. We got it all figured out. So Bush didn't trouble himself with these kinds of questions. That's what neocons are for, but they're complete idiots. And the idea was that they're so smart. Oh, Paul Wolfowitz. Why, one time he predicted that Saddam Hussein would do something that Saddam Hussein did, which I think would have been his invasion of Iran, which America gave him the green light to do. So, yeah, big prediction, dude. But wow, what a brilliant genius. That means we got to let this guy decide whatever he wants. He's so damn smart. And then you guys know how that is from your, dealing with people in your real life, that anybody who's that smart is not that smart. And they're always going to be overlooking something. And you could have, a real dummy who's got some real compelling wisdom on really important things. And a guy like Paul Wolfowitz is the kind of guy who would make the worst decisions in American foreign policy history, right, in terms of even from the empire's own point of view of what they were trying to accomplish. He ran the car into the ditch. The guy's a complete, failure and loser. But they looked at him and said, wow, well, if you guys say so, then this is going to be great. Let's do it. And then, of course, it didn't work out like that at all. What happened instead was that Bush put Iran's best friends in power. It was the Shiites, all right. They weren't taking orders. I mean, in fact, let me ask you, have you ever heard anything about the history of Iraq War II, where the Jordanians were dominant or even had a say at all in anything that happened in Iraq War II, right? Nothing. They had no influence whatsoever. And look, it was Ahmed Chalabi, who was working for himself first and Iran second, and who conned these guys. And I have the quote in the book where he says, look, I just had to tell these guys what they needed to hear to get the war. Don't worry about me. I'm with you guys still. That was him talking to his friends. Don't worry, I'm just manipulating these idiots. And so that's how it happened. And then this explains then the rest of American policy in the Middle East since then too. Because if what Bush did by invading that country, starting that war, was put Iran's best friends in power, where they remain to this day, well then shit. That's not what they wanted to happen. So now what are they going to do? So then that explains why they're back on the side of the terrorists, as I explained earlier, where most of the time they're on the same side as the bin Ladenites nowadays. Well, that's why. They're trying to get revenge against the Shiites because they're mad that they fought Iraq War II for them. And so they and of course, every time they do this, like in Syria, they started the covert war against Assad to try to weaken Iran. Yeah, don't you think, Jeffrey Goldberg says to Obama, don't you think if we get rid of Assad and Damascus, that'll help bring Iran down a peg? And Obama says, absolutely. Okay, but then what happened? Damascus is more dependent on Iran than ever before. Iran has more influence inside Syria than ever before. They're closer to Hezbollah, who are more battle-hardened and experienced than ever before. Mm-hmm. And so, and the same thing in the war in Yemen, where when the Houthis came to power, they knew that they were a small minority and they were going to have to share power with everybody else. And they were already talking about coming up with pretty elaborate power sharing arrangements under the new constitution. Then America started bombing them. And then that was 6.5 years ago. We're still bombing them. Not quite 6.25 years ago. We're still bombing them. They're still in power in the capital city. And I guarantee you, however this war, shakes out in the end, the Houthis are going to be that much less likely to share power with other people and are now, closer to Iran than ever before. It wasn't until 2019. It could have been 18, but still, that would have been 3 years into the war. I think it was in 19. I think it was 4 years into the war was when the head Houthi, I forgot his name, actually traveled to Tehran and met with the Ayatollah, and the Ayatollah recognized his government as the official government of Yemen. Well, hell, they seized the capital city at the end of 2014. They'd been, pardon me, Dr. Pepper, they'd been the government of Yemen for years at that point, before the Ayatollah finally said, okay, I recognize you as the official government of Yemen. So the thing in Iraq, again, why'd they do Iraq? Because it was supposed to help split Hezbollah away from Iran. It was supposed to weaken Iran. And Dave Wormser also wrote that once the Iraqi Shiites are under America's control, then we're going to use them to lord it over Iran. And the Iraqi Shiites are going to have it so good that they're going to put pressure on the Iranians to rise up and overthrow their government, create a new pro-American government in Iran too. So we won't even have to go to war with Iran, because we're going to have so much more advanced influence over their country. So Iraq and Syria and Yemen, all three, in a sense, fought to limit Iran's power. All three have enhanced it. And then same thing, of course, for fighting for the Hazaras against the Taliban for the last 20 years in Afghanistan, too. Those are Iran's friends there.
Something I never really understood is how didn't the CIA, when they came in contact with Chalabi, like he had a history of being like a criminal fraudster, like prior. Right. And when they
had a burn notice on him.
Yeah, because weren't they saying that he was just creating the factory?
In 95. There was a failed coup or failed Kurdish uprising in 1995, where Chalabi had kind of double-crossed the CIA. That guy Robert Baer was involved in it, and essentially they tried to launch the war and kind of force America to back them up in a Bay of Pigs style kind of thing, and it didn't work. And I'm not exactly sure what all happened there, but I know it failed, and the CIA put a burn notice on Chalabi after that. Like he was.
I actually have the quote from him. I have the quote from Robert Baer right now. It was something like a spy novel. It was a room where people were scanning Iraqi intelligence documents into computers and doing disinformation. There was a whole wing of it that he did forgeries in. He was forging back then in order to bring down Saddam. Mm-hmm. And then the quality of the oh, sorry, Scott.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the quality of the INC's intelligence was very bad. There was a feeling that Chalabi was prepping defectors. We had no systematic way to vet the information, but it was obviously most of it was cooked.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, too, is Bob Baer is not a trustworthy guy at all, but I think he's right about this stuff. And, so the CIA had a burn notice on it, but the Pentagon neocons hired him. That was what happened in 2002, was he just went to work for the Pentagon, and they paid him instead. And then, the CIA, I don't think really laundered too many of his lies. See, well, that's not really right. So Curveball was the Iraqi defector who talked to the Germans and claimed that they had these biological weapons labs and all of that. And they play down the connection there, but there is a connection there. He was the cousin of a guy that worked for Chalabi in the office there. So they claim that wasn't an INC defector, but it seems like it really was. But for the most part, I think the CIA mostly ignored Chalabi's stuff, but the neocons didn't. They took it all, and they had their own little intelligence office in the Pentagon called the Office of Special Plans, where they would go through the CIA's trash and or whatever the INC was giving them and turn all that intelligence, so-called, into talking point format and funnel it straight to the media and straight to the president and the vice president's office. And so, the CIA, they were willing to torture people into lying about Iraq. So don't get me wrong. But there was just a certain subset of lies that they weren't really involved in. And that was the Chalabi stuff that was coming, basically through the Pentagon. And then, I know you guys are younger than me, and there are people listening who are probably even younger than you who just don't even remember this time at all. But, oh, my God, the level of BS. I mean, talk about hitting you over the head with things that ain't true that you have to believe or else. And the level of sanctimony behind all of this is just otherworldly and unbelievable and unforgettable or forgivable, the way that they did this. And they had it where, people's families broke up over this stuff. Neighbors shot each other over this stuff.
Yikes.
And people, it was crazy the way, because think of it like this, the way that they set it up was that half the country believing that the other half of the country didn't want to defend America against the people who'd attacked us. I can't believe you don't think we should do anything to Iraq after Saddam Hussein attacked us on 9/11. Like, what kind of commie, hippie, homo traitor are you? That you hate America so much that you don't think we even have the right to defend ourselves when somebody kills 3,000 of us. You traitor, commie, homo, hippie, whatever. Then the other half of America is going, no, you idiot. That wasn't Saddam that did that. But you see how there's no middle ground there, right?
It's a false choice for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, the level of vitriol here was it was unbelievable, And then, of course, once the torture regime was all revealed, then Bush said, you're damn right we torture people. Not that we torture people. It didn't torture anything, but you're damn right we do. Don't we, everybody? And demanded that the American right wing take his side on torture. This is what it means to be an American conservative and a Christian. In fact, the polls showed the more Christian you are, the more church you go to, Catholic or Protestant, the more you support torture. Because that's what George W. Bush wants.
Yikes.
Speaking of the son of God, right? The son of H.W. Bush says we got to torture people, including to death. And if we do, then that's just fine. That's patriotism. That's, protecting America. And it's probably hard for people who were too young to, remember how it was then, to even imagine the level of sanctimony behind this garbage, this absolute garbage. I mean, you got articles this week, with the fall of the regime in Afghanistan. You have kind of, in the 20 years since September 11th, you have these kind of retrospective pieces where Bush administration people are now saying, yeah, okay, we shouldn't have done Iraq. That was everybody's fault but mine, right? Like John Negroponte and some of these others. I knew better. I knew we shouldn't do it, but they wanted to do it anyway. But so in other words, you got people in the W. Bush years who were, in the Bush government then, who in 2021 will say, yeah, no, that was a mistake. A mistake? Man, of all of the unforced, premeditated murder plots that went awry, this was one of them, man. This is like on the level of Japan attacking America. Mm-hmm. Bad idea, dude. What the hell do you guys think you're doing? You don't start wars. Who told you it was okay to start a war? And they did. And they beat everybody over the head with, oh, the terrorists are going to get you if you won't let us defend you. And, here's the part. I always say, I think I probably piss people off with this sometimes, but I always bring up they're trying to keep your mama afraid. But the thing is, it's not like I'm just trying to get you mad, like in defense of your mama kind of emotional button push type thing. It's that's true, right? Like they weren't saying it wasn't like some elite thing, right? They were trying to build up a mass movement of support for starting this war. They needed for everyone in your neighborhood, including the little old lady who doesn't know about political stuff and never messes with stuff like this. And you need your mom They needed the head of the local PTA and your gym coach and your minister and the population of your little culture in your little suburb where you're from. To keep everybody terrified so that they could get away with starting this war. And they knew they were lying. They knew they were manipulating people. And you had people who were kind of on the edge of mental illness who W. Bush pushed them right off the cliff. You know, there were 1 million killed, but I don't know how many millions and millions and millions of lives ruined by Iraq War II. But then pushing those lies on the American people so they could start that war. And obviously the Iraqis got the brunt of it. But you know what? Millions of Americans went to that war and back. And same for Afghanistan. Got a lot of guys who went over there, participated in this stuff, and then were yanked right back out again. Who, well, their lives would be different and better if it hadn't have been that way, you know, and never had to be this way at all. It's crazy. It's completely crazy. I remember telling my then 7-year-old nephew, hey, look, I'm not going to tell you all about it. Never mind. But I just want you to know that your Uncle Scott's against this war. You don't start a war, ever. That's just wrong on the face of it. And that's all I have to say to you about it. You're just a little kid, but I want you to remember this, that there were people who knew better and said so at the time. You don't do this. And then now look at us. That was 20 years ago. That was 18 years ago. And look at us. Everybody knows now that antiwar.com was right all along. You know? Well, what does that tell you? Antiwar.com was right all along. The Hawks were wrong all along. Not just in starting the wars, but all the surges and all the, you know, humanitarian interventions and all the CIA ops. None of it had to happen. You know, I quote in Fool's Errand Anthony Zinni and Gary Bernsen. So Zinni was the former commander of CENTCOM. Bernsen was the former CIA officer in charge at Tora Bora. And both of them told Michael Hirsch in 2016 that, yeah, you know, it sucks, but really the whole war could have been over by Christmas 2001. We really didn't have to have a war on terrorism at all. Certainly not a generation of it. Certainly not an era of it. Could have killed bin Laden at Tora Bora and been home in time for stockings on the 25th. And that could have been the end of that. And that's even, you know, never mind trying to negotiate extradition of the guy, but just even assuming that you needed a violent response to the attack at all. It could have been over by Christmas. Yeah, the New York Times just 2 weeks ago, right as, you know, the anniversary of September 11th is happening and the Taliban are taking back over Kabul. And the New York Times ran a piece about, yeah, it's true, Mullah Omar tried to surrender to the United States. At the end of November 2001, he tried to surrender. And Donald Rumsfeld told him to go to hell. We're not accepting surrenders right now. Okay? So, in other words, that's finally now in the official paper of record after it's all over and it's all too late. In 2021 and a half, the newspaper of record, the New York Times says, oh, yeah, you know what? I guess Horton was right. We have to do
let's talk about the New York Times, because the New York Times is one of the key media outlets that really sold the public into the war. Specifically, I mean, everyone was doing it, but I mean, the New York Times is like the left-leaning paper of record that you can rely on. I mean, if they're saying that Saddam has weapons, if Judith Miller is saying that Saddam has chemical weapons, then, you know, it must really be true. And the whole conspiracy, because I think it was a conspiracy, they conspired to do this, of how, you know, they were working with Judith Miller. Essentially, they were working with Judith Miller, and Colin Powell was going on Fox and, you know, quoting Judith Miller articles, and citing them as evidence, and it basically just became a giant circle jerk. Like, can you kind of help explain that, like the role of the New York Times in the media and how neoconservatives were using these media outlets to you know, sell people on this war?
Yeah. Well, you know, Michael Gordon stayed, her partner on all those stories, got to stay at the Times for years. He's at the Wall Street Journal now. But he's the same guy who led the propaganda campaign accusing Iran of being behind all the roadside bombs in 2011. The same guy who had, 2007. The same guy who had lied us into war with Judy Miller. And you're absolutely right. So famously, and they did this over and over again. But the biggest one was Saddam Hussein continues quest for A-bomb parts. And it's by Miller and Gordon. And it cites the centrifuges. I forget if it cites the Africa. I think it cites the seizure of the aluminum tubes that supposedly could be used for centrifuges, which was nonsense. I mistakenly identified them as centrifuges a second ago. I shouldn't have said that. They're aluminum tubes that the completely ridiculous false accusation was that these are not for rockets, they're for centrifuges. So they ran that story, but it was the vice president's office had placed the story in there. It was Scooter Libby, I believe it was. I forgot how we know that, but who had specifically put the story in the paper. And then the next day, Dick Cheney, is it like the Sunday morning, above the fold top story? And then Dick Cheney goes on Meet the Press with Tim Russert and says, well, Tim, there's a story in the New York Times today that says that Saddam is increasing his quest for A-bomb parts. And so we're going to take this really seriously. And he's pretending that he found out from the newspaper when he's the one who put the story in the newspaper. And then the newspaper says, the source is a former congressional aide. Wait a minute. Former congressional aide? In other words, it's Scooter Libby, special advisor to the President of the United States, who, is a former congressional aide, totally misleading kind of identification of the source of the story there when it came straight out of the vice president's office. And then they did that, and they repeated that. And the aluminum tube story was the main story that they used to drum up the accusation that Saddam is seeking nuclear weapons. He's going to make nuclear weapons. He's reconstituted his nuclear weapons program, or even nuclear weapons themselves, Cheney said, and over again, based on this lie about these aluminum tubes. And then that was when they, came up with this line. It was the White House Iraq group, led by Karl Rove in the White House, came up. They were in charge of coming up with like the memes and the talking points and stuff. And they said, and they had George Bush, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and Dick Cheney, and I might be forgetting one, but certainly all of them used the exact same line on TV. Well, we can't wait for the proof, the final evidence that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud over an American city. So, just think about the level of obvious and blatant dishonesty there. Oh, I can prove there's a danger to you, but if I wait long enough to gather enough proof to make you really believe me, then, your whole city could get nuked and you and your mom are going to die in your jammies in the middle of the night if you make me prove it to you.
Was that a Frank Luntz line?
I'm sorry?
A Frank Luntz line?
I don't know about if he had any say in that or not.
Or that smoking gun, Frank Luntz.
Yeah,
it might be confusing.
Yeah, I don't know if he was a direct consultant for the White House Iraq group or not. I would have to go back and look at that. But if Karl Rove was bouncing this stuff off of him at the time, that would not surprise me one bit. And you guys, I actually saw this. I remember seeing this live on TV at the time when it happened. You guys may have heard of this, where in August of 2002, it was after the VFW speech, where Cheney just got up there and lied to all the veterans of the foreign wars specifically, the guys who are going to send their sons to the next one. And someone asked him, so are we really getting going on pushing for the Iraq war now? And Card says, well, from a marketing point of view, you don't want to debut new products in August. You want to wait till after Labor Day. And so then, that was the way that they talked about it. It was a marketing campaign.
It's like the new iPhones.
Yeah, exactly. That was how well thought out it was. That we've got to make people terrified. And that also meant torturing absolute ridiculous lies about upcoming terrorist attacks out of innocent people or even guilty people. But my colleague Sheikh Mohammed, they were torturing the hell out of this guy through 2002. And he's coming up with all of these scare stories that, there could be a target. There could be an attack on a bank somewhere in New York or New Jersey. So, oh my God, orange alert. All banks in New York and New Jersey, call out your extra security. Call out your local police forces and your SWAT teams and your riot police and your extra stormtrooper squads. Everybody stand around dressed up in your like science fiction Total Recall police state gear. And then there's no threat to a bank. I'll remember this one, man. I'll never forget this one. I was driving in Austin, and the top of the hour news says, the orange alert, a new terrorist threat has come in. A school somewhere in Texas could be attacked by Al-Qaeda.
A school in Texas.
So there's like 50,000 schools in Texas.
Yeah,
right?
that's how ridiculous.
You've ever been to Texas? Yeah, there's like, I lost count, but something like 8 or 10 major cities in this state. And then with literally something like 5 or 6 or 8,000 towns. Right? I mean, thousands of towns of, hundreds of counties. I forgot how many exactly, but I'm pretty sure there's more than 200 counties in Texas. Oh, a school somewhere in Texas might get blown up today. So if you're a parent in Texas, you're a little bit more for attacking Iraq today. That's essentially how that worked. And
how would they even pull that off? How would they even?
It's the most cynical thing. It's the most cynical thing, and especially how did W. Bush pull that off?
Yeah.
And I guess the real answer is the media. The media. Back to the thing about the New York Times. Like, hey, if even the liberal New York Times says that this is all legit and above board and everybody knows it's true, then how can you argue with that? If everybody, the way I remember it, and I'm right about everything, is that if you had a problem with the Bush government on anything, you're the jerk. How dare you? These men are doing everything they can to protect our country against the terrorist Islamist threat of the terrorism and the thing. And that didn't change at all. There wasn't even a crack in that shield until Hurricane Katrina drowned New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, this is something where you don't have to care about the news. You don't have to care about the world or foreign policy. You don't have to know any Arabic names. You don't have to care about anything. You just be a complete regular person, cares nothing about nothing but baseball and shoelaces. But oh my God, New Orleans is drowning on TV. Everybody's watching that.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody's watching the national government do nothing for 6 days. And it's like, wait a minute. It's fucking Thursday. Where are they? They're not coming at all. Nobody's coming.
Right.
And the National Guard, the Louisiana National Guard, was in Iraq. And the neighboring state guards, they were in Iraq. And then the feds weren't coming. They just weren't coming. The only thing they were doing was turning people away who were trying to help. Walmart came with 18-wheelers full of bottles of water. They were turned away at gunpoint. The Alabama Bass Fishermen's flat-bottom boat Bass Fishermen's Association came. These little aluminum boats that ride like this deep in the water, right? And they can go anywhere. And these are all good old boys. They got guns if they need one. And they're not allowed to go and try to rescue people. They're turned away at gunpoint. While 1,000 people drown. More. And then finally, there's, Anderson Cooper on CNN live crying like a girl. And finally, like the dam breaks, proverbially. Finally, actually, you know what? Maybe George W. Bush possibly is not the most competent administrator in world history.
For me, it was Kanye saying George Bush don't care about black people.
Yeah. Look, September 11th happened on his watch. He'd been president for 8 months.
Right.
In fact, he benefited from the fact that he's such an idiot and such a loser and such a nobody that for the American people who didn't understand that, boy, there's a war coming, he might as well not even been president. So when the attack came, instead of holding him responsible, they held him totally not responsible, right? They're like, oh, come on. He's George Bush's retarded son. He doesn't know. People didn't even... think about it. Like, if it had been Al Gore, people would have said, God damn, Al Gore, you've been vice president for 8 years and president for 8 months. You couldn't have done nothing to stop that thing from happening? But W. Bush was such an idiot, that people just gave him the benefit of the doubt. They're like, come on. What could he have possibly understood enough to do anything about this?
Didn't mean any harm.
You know? Yeah, poor guy.
I would have a beer with him.
You know?
That's what I would hear. I would have a beer with GW.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that helped him. The fact that he was such an idiot, it became an excuse for him. But then at the same time, he somehow was endowed with superhuman, semi-deity-like powers of control and, first of all, benevolence, but second of all, competence, as Abby Hall would say, these huge assumptions that this guy, one, has the right idea in mind or even means well at all, rather than cares about himself and is going to get away with bloody murder now because he has the opportunity to. But then second of all, that he has the first clue of how to do anything. And again, for people who were old enough at the time, the narrative was, hey, the U.S. Army is real tough, okay? The U.S. Army can kick your ass. The U.S. Army can do anything. You're telling me you think some Arabs can stand up against the force of the U.S. Army? And that was certainly what W. Bush thought. Famously, he was quoted, he said this was his only regret of his presidency, was that he had turned to the camera and said, well, people concerned about the security situation there in Iraq, I say bring them on. We're not worried about that. We can take them. We can do it, right? And then he felt bad about that because there were families of dead GIs who said to him, I can't believe you said that, you son of a bitch. You said bring them on, and then my son got shot, jerk. And then he went, oh, man, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have said that. But the point being, what was he thinking when he said that? What he was thinking when he said that was he was picturing the Jolly Green Giant, right? You can't mess with this. This is the U.S. Army, this force, this, unstoppable juggernaut. When no, it's not, man. It's 20-year-old boys standing around with rifles, getting shot at, getting their legs and nuts blown off. But he didn't understand that. He looked at it in the same way as the propaganda campaign had it, that USA, number one, we can do anything, which is also strange because you're supposed to be cowering in terror under your kitchen table that the terrorists are going to blow you up at any second now. But that's just, I guess, why we got to take our superpower status and go and smash them and protect us. And then, so it goes. They just, round and around and around.
Cognitive dissonance, I think.
Yeah. I mean, look, I can't tell you how many guys have told me they went and joined the military after September 11th, like on the 12th. Mm-hmm. Or on the 13th because they had to go kiss their mama goodbye. And then they went and joined the army. And I'm going, man, did you think we didn't have a standing army? Like, did you think we didn't have the forces available to invade Afghanistan? To take on a few hundred bandits? The world empire. The world superpower. We have a 1 million-man army. Thank you very much. But people just had that's how disconnected people are. They're like, oh my God, Uncle Sam needs my help. Come on. Really? And then what happened? All those guys who thought they were going to Al-Qaeda to fight legions of, I don't know, millions of Al-Qaeda guys or whatever it was they thought they were getting, they all got sent to Iraq instead. There were only a few hundred Al-Qaeda guys in Afghanistan, and we let them get away in December 2001. The new recruits weren't out of basic training yet before the war on terrorism was over and the war for terrorism had begun. These guys were going to use them to do whatever they wanted. That was the story of Pat Tillman, who joined all idealistically after September 11th, renounced his millions of dollar football contract, went and joined the Green Berets, or the Rangers, I guess, and then went to Iraq and was like, what the hell? What does this have to do with anything? I'm being used and abused. Me and my guys were being lied to. And then he got sent to Afghanistan, where he died, I guess in an accident, of friendly fire, where he's shot at by his own guys. And then what do? And let's just presume that really was an accident and not a coincidence that this guy who had started emailing back and forth with Noam Chomsky about how anti-war he was was just accidentally killed. Then they covered all that up, and they made him the poster boy, and they said that he died fighting terrorists and all this stuff and used him to recruit a bunch more guys, based on the same kind of lies. And they made such a big deal about the fact he'd been killed in Afghanistan. It made it sound like we were at war in Afghanistan, I mean, at that point, there was nobody left to fight. It's just our guys scouting around in the mountains shooting each other.
Yeah, I remember that when he died, it was presented this brave patriot gave up, like, just so selfless and sacrificing himself for his country, and then comes out that he was actually against these wars and he had become disenfranchised with it. Yep. That had to be a big turning point for a lot of people. And yeah, I've heard that theory that he may have been assassinated. I'm not
so sure of that. I mean, it's close enough.
I'm not. Yeah.
Work these guys. I don't know. But they sure lied about it. They lied to his mom about it. You don't
lie to the mom.
Yeah, they lied to his mom and dad.
That's an extra level of fucked up.
Yeah. Your son was a hero. Your son died fighting evil terrorists. We're going to use him as our poster boy for recruiting more boys to go and do the same thing. When then it turned out that wasn't true at all.
Before 9/11, my only knowledge of I was 11 years old when 9/11 happened. So I was a perfect age to be propagandized, just old enough to kind of understand what was going on and have some understanding of what a Muslim was, but very little. My only knowledge was of the Middle East was the movie Hot Shot Parts 2 with Charlie Sheen, and like it's a parody on Rambo where Saddam Hussein is the villain and he's just an idiot. He's just a dumb idiot. And that was my only reference on the Middle East until 9/11. And then all this happens, and then everyone becomes one person. Like, there was a conflation between, Saddam Hussein, the secular dictator, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban. All these groups just became the Muslims.
Yep.
And I think that's where, we were talking about before we started recording, your debate with Hirsi Ali. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name. I think it's Hirsi Ali. But this clash of civilizations, I mean, they really believe it because they conflate all these people together. Like, they're all just the Muslims.
Yeah, exactly right. And then look how easy that is, right? You take a group of 400 guys, get to speak for 1.5 billion people. Look at, and this came up in that debate too, with Hirsi Ali, that the guy that was nominally on her side, although he kind of hung her out to dry, and didn't do much, taking her side in the thing.
I think one of the things he brought up. Ship. He knew it was a sinking ship.
I think I got this book. The guy recommended the book, The Missing Martyrs, and it's about how even at the height of the Islamic State, you only had about 50,000 guys, and a lot of those were conscripts, just local Iraqi Sunni conscripts. So where are all the terrorists, man? Out of 1.8 billion Muslims, you can't get more than a couple of tens of thousands to join the caliphate at the height of the Islamic State. No, obviously they don't believe in that shit. Sorry for your narrative, but where are all the terrorists? Even as America's killing 2 million people. It's a million Iraqis. But you want to add in the Libyans, and the Syrians, and the Afghans, and the Pakistanis, and the Somalis, and the Yemenis who've died, we're talking over a couple of million people. And yet look how hard it is to get people to join a volunteer armed force like that. A stateless group of bandits like that. It's a very difficult project to sustain. Joining a government's military, well, that's easy. 3 hots and a cot and a pair of boots and a rifle and orders and stuff. But you just can't get people to join Al-Qaeda, even after all this time. So, it just goes to show, again, it didn't have to be this way at all. And, it's an important part of the story that, look, bin Laden wanted us out of the way so he could overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia. But he couldn't overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia anyway. If America had gotten out of his way, he still couldn't do it. If America had gotten out of his way, Zawahiri couldn't overthrow Mubarak. These terrorists, these al-Qaeda guys were in no position to wage a single revolution. It took W. Bush's war in Iraq and Obama's war in Syria to create the caliphate for them. Before that, there are all secular dictators in the way. There's all sovereign nation states in the way, no caliphate. And so you're right, that was the lie. But look at what a damn dirty lie it was. There's just no truth to it at all. You know?
Well, I was disappointed to see Tulsi Gabbard, like her 9/11 home. Did you see that? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where
she always does that stuff. And, you know, I sent her the book, and I got a nice postcard back. Thanks for the book. I can't wait to read it. So she at least ought to know better. And look, you know, and I talk about her in the book, that she was in Iraq War II, stationed at the Balad Air Base north of Baghdad, which had mortars coming over the walls. And she had, you know, bleeding, screaming, dying young Americans. You know, she's part of a medical unit. I was treating, you know, guys who just gotten blown up a minute ago. So she went through all kinds of, I don't know exactly what, but she had a hell of a battlefield experience over there. They qualify her as a combat vet, not that she was ever pulling triggers in combat, but she had to drive that highway between Baghdad and the base, and she was getting mortared at that base with the rest of them. So it ain't the same as being stateside, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why she was good on Syria. Because Obama was asking us to take the side of al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria. And she was going, I'm sorry, man. I know who are the shirts and who are the skins in this game. And I'm not siding with the bin Ladenites. Are you crazy? And so, fair enough. You know, but at the same time, you got to recognize that. So at that point, she's like, you know, at least one solid click better than absolutely crazy, batshit, insane, high treason. Backing al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria. So, in other words, you don't really have to be good. You just have to be human. You know, you just have to be not Benedict Arnold, not Barack Obama to agree with her on Syria, right? But there's room enough in her argument to wage war against terrorism, broadly defined, forever. And she said, you know, in one of her campaign ads that she put out on Twitter last year, she goes, listen, the war on al-Qaeda is not over. She goes, there are terrorists in the Idlib province in Syria. There are terrorists in Yemen, which in both cases, America backs al-Qaeda's side there. But anyway, and then she goes, and there's al-Shabaab in Somalia. Well, okay, but like now we're defining al-Qaeda very broadly when al-Shabaab is really a local nuisance. Yeah, and their most ambitious leader, Godane, was killed back in 2014. I mean, they're just really, they are Saudi money recipients. They are not truly international terrorists. So she goes, so there's AQ in Idlib and in Yemen and in Somalia. There are hundreds of these groups around the region that we have to fight. These bin Ladenite terrorists, she says. And it's just like, what are you talking about? How do you go from 1 to 2, where we're on their side, to 3, where now you're really stretching to even define them as al-Qaeda at all, to then 97 or even 197 more groups than that? Minimum 200 if you want to say hundreds. You know, no, there's not. It's just a stupid lie. It's completely ridiculous. And there are people say, well, yeah, that's because she's a Hindu nationalist. I don't know. She certainly believes a load of crap about this and repeats it constantly. When the reality is most Salafists and Wahhabists stay home. They don't do anything. I mean, there are millions of Salafists and Wahhabists. These are like the more fundamentalist and radical edge of Sunni Islam. They all stay home. They go to work and then they come home. They don't blow up anybody. They're not really political at all. They're quietists. They believe in a fundamentalist interpretation of Islam. That doesn't mean they're willing to join an army to kill others to die for it. You know, it's just not true. So who the hell is she lying to anyway? And who's she trying to impress with this crap anyway? I mean, well, in fact, that's the thing is I think she believes it. But I'm kind of ashamed of her for that because it's completely stupid and she should know better. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what do you think of like the reaction right now from so you've been on Fox News lately on Kennedy's show. The right wing is kind of like, I'm disappointed, but I do think they've made progress, but not enough progress. Like if you watch Tucker Carlson, the day that Kabul falls, he has, I think his first guest was Andrew Bacevich. The day that Kabul fell.
Really?
Andrew Bacevich and then Douglas McGregor were his first two guests. And I think maybe Glenn Greenwald was on the show later.
Great.
But it was like,
I should have seen that.
Like a really good lineup. And then a couple of days ago, like a couple of days after that, he had Danny Davis on it. He had all these great right-wing, like ex-military guys. Like the type of guys that can speak to the right wing and say, hey, these wars are stupid. Like they're not having some hippity-dippity person who's going to turn people off. So in that regard, I mean, you may have saw, I think, did you see this guy Joe Kent?
Yes.
Congressman out of Washington?
I did see that interview, and that was so impressive, man. I sent him the book. I can't wait to find out what he thinks of the thing if he reads it, you know. I think I sent him both books, probably.
Yeah, I mean, try calling that guy a pussy, man. Like, that guy is a right-winger. He just knows that these wars are dumb. But, all right, once even though Tucker's good on, like, the Middle Eastern wars or Afghanistan, he still sucks in a lot of stuff. Like, I don't want to give him too much credit. But after that, Sean Hannity comes on. And what Sean Hannity has is he literally has a clock, like a day counter, like the Iranian hostage crisis.
Uh-huh.
It is just the most ridiculous things. Like it's now day 14 of American stranded in Afghanistan. It's now day 15. So part of it is just completely fell and had been dumbed down by just standard partisan politics
Hannity. Well, you know, and I heard that Trump went on Hannity's show and then blamed it on Bush. You know, he could have taken a cheap shot. Dave was talking about this. He could have taken a cheap shot and just blamed it all on Biden. But he goes, you know, W. Bush, this is all his fault. He never should have done this. And what I didn't ask Dave, which I should have asked Dave, was what does Sean Hannity say about that? I mean, Sean Hannity was just the mouth of Sauron back then. He was just absolutely the worst. You know, that hour of him every single night shouting down everyone who knew better, accusing them all of siding with terrorists and hating America and all the, you know, him and Bill O'Reilly, the two of them, they were as bad as Dick Cheney. They're as bad as Bill Kristol or anybody else who worked to get us into that war, to propagandize for that war. And, you know, I know the guy ain't sorry, but, you know, has he learned a lesson at all from that? That, like, he was so certain, my God, man. And, like, again, for the young people who don't remember, the way it was Hannity wasn't just Hannity. Hannity was half of Hannity and Combs.
Oh, my
God. Alan Combs from New York, who, I swear to God, I had no idea. I wish I'd put two and two together on this and figured this out. But for Public Enemy fans, on Black Planet, where they do the radio show, Incident at 66.6 FM, that's Alan Combs. He's going, well, geez, Chuck, if you heard all the stuff they were saying about you, whatever, that was Alan Combs. Anyway, so the way the script worked was Alan Combs would go, well, geez, Sean, I agree with you about the terrible, dangerous threat, but I just think we shouldn't do anything about it because I'm afraid. And then Hannity would go, that's right, because you liberals are weaklings and cowards, but you concede our entire point that something must be done and we're going to do it, and so screw you. And then on to the next one. And then they just do it over and over and over again. And that was Combs' only role, basically, was to be a bowling pin for Hannity to knock down, you know, night after night after night after night. And that worked. I mean, that worked, dude. That, you know, without him, I bet you could notch them percentage points for support for all this stuff down by 8. You know, like that guy was a force to be reckoned with, him and Bill O'Reilly both. And they had the entire rest of TV media terrified that he was leaving them in the dust with his hawkishness. They needed to be more like that, you know. And I'm proud of Tucker Carlson for getting it right now. He was horrible back then. And I think he really resents the people who lied to him, and he resents himself, like regrets that he had been so bad on that stuff. And I don't know if he ever really said he was sorry and like came totally clean about it, but I think he clearly made a decision that screw these neocons, man. I think maybe his change might have come with Ron Paul in 2008. That just, you'd have to be a fool to believe in this stuff anymore. Come on. And, you know, I think he really has gotten much, much better on foreign policy since then. And I think it's personal. I think he put faith in these guys. Okay, you guys say you got to do this? Fine. And then it was a disaster. You know, and I think he, you know, Carlson certainly is a much more thoughtful person than O'Reilly or Hannity at all. So I think, you know, he must have been sitting by himself eating dinner one night and thought, man, I can't believe what those guys are going through over there. You know what I mean? It mattered to him in a way other than just cashing his checks and having a TV persona and all of this stuff the way Hannity is. But I got to wonder about the people who watch Carlson and then watch Hannity. Like, can't they tell the difference in the substance here, you know?
I don't know. I think they're just geared towards different demographics. I think that Tucker Carlson hits more of the 25 to 55 demographic, and Hannity is really just for the boomers.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really listen to Sean Hannity and take him seriously unless you are a boomer con of what they call them. Like I think maybe my mom still listens to Hannity. My family's very conservative. I grew up with Sean Hannity and Alan Combs, and it was very apparent that Alan Combs, or Michael Combs or Alan Combs, am I saying? Yeah, Alan. It was very clear that they, you know, he kind of looked like Droopy from Charlie Brown. Like he just he played the role as the weak liberal, and Sean Hannity was the all-American guy who was, you know, standing up for the soldiers and the troops. But you know who kind of plays that role now at Fox News? Juan Williams.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of plays that role now as kind of like the real radical Democrat.
Yeah.
So I think all these news channels do that. They get that foil, that guy who kind of just plays his role.
The token, if you will.
Yeah. Like the token liberal, the token conservative. Mm-hmm. I think kind of Morning Joe was kind of like that before he before he went anti-Trump.
You know, and Combs is dead now, and I think there's a lesson there too. That, like, you know, he was making all that money during all that time and all that, but then now he's dead. And he spent the last 20 years of his life not being true to himself. You know, he spent the last 20 years of his life being a shill for, you know, deliberately, you know, making the weak argument in order to help inoculate the opinions of right-wing war hawks in the very worst way. And he must have regretted it. You only get one life, then you're dead, unless you believe in Hinduism. You know? So, I mean, can you imagine your role? That, like, well, I get up there and I say what I want to say, but I know that the only reason they have me there is because I'm not up to it. But oh well, got to pay that mortgage.
I'm there to make the other side look good.
Yeah, seriously. Like, get a smaller house, work at the bowling alley, have some self-respect, you know?
I don't know, just write for something. I mean, he works for Fox News. He can get some media job, but I guess the money.
He had a radio show. Like I say, he had a radio show in New York already for whatever. He had a career already, which I swear to God, I don't remember how I figured that out. I think it was when I read a book about Public Enemy, and they were like, yeah, the infamous episode where they went on the Alan Colmes show, and I was like, that's Alan Colmes?
The Alan Colmes?
Because I just had never put that. I mean, that album came out in 89 or 90. And I just had never put that together, that was him. And I just, oh my God, once I figured it out. Anyway, after the show, everybody go listen to Incident at 66.6 FM, and you'll know what I'm talking about.
Well, Scott, we can go on for like literally hours, and I want to be respectful of your time. I'm wondering, do we have a little bit of time to maybe ask a couple questions from our Patreon supporters?
Let's do it.
A couple folks wanted to pick your brain on a few topics, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right, let's see what we got here. All right, so this first one is admittedly not something that I'm very good at talking about, but we have a Patreon subscriber who's very interested in some new types of governments. In particular, he's interested in what's called nationality as a service, which you can think of it as like, your subscription to Netflix, right? We, choose to buy into this. Well, the whole idea is apparently that we could buy into a government by choice.
I'm for it. Listen, I just saw a Twitter thread by this brilliant college professor guy who has all these weird, like, logical fallacies and other things he's talking about. I should have retweeted something so you could go look at it. Mm-hmm. That was one of the things that he talked about was, the future of, people completely reimagining governments where it's not proximity and a monopoly on territory, but it's, people signing up by contract for the security services they require and all that. I say smash the state, please, as soon as you can, and let's figure out other ways to do it. And look, when people say, well, yeah, but without the government monopoly on force, what's it going to look like? The answer is the free market will take care of it, right? I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I know that the free market will work it out if we have one. So let's concentrate on keeping the market and security services free to open entry and open exit, and may the best man win in the marketplace. Absolutely right.
That's awesome. So this particular subscriber is actually working towards trying to build that down in Australia, and it's if you want to check out his website, it's nonhuman.party.
Hell yeah. Best of luck to you, man.
Cool. All right, next question. This one actually comes from Joseph Solis Mullen, who you had on the show and who we just recently had. He wanted to know what are your forecasts for the Middle East in the next 10 years? And he's interested in to see how things play out, with the U.S. increasingly turning its attention elsewhere.
That's interesting. Man, I have to predict the worst. I guess I predict the status quo. They can do everything they can to keep troops in Iraq and Syria, do everything they can to somehow, continue to frustrate Iranian power. I really hope they get back in the Iran nuclear deal, but I don't predict any major shift back toward the Persians. If the Biden people, take their own results as good advice, then they should recognize that even the degree to which they have backed off already is having positive results. And you've had the Iranians and the Saudis been meeting in Baghdad and secret meetings in Iraq for months now, trying to talk and work things out. As soon as, this is before Biden, when the Senate voted to end the war in Yemen, the UAE pulled their military out, and they still have an armed mercenary force, including Al-Qaeda on the ground there, and they're still part of the war. They pulled their main infantry forces out of the country, and they immediately sent an ambassador to Tehran to go and talk to the Iranians, because they're nervous that the Americans might not have our back. And if they don't, then we better figure out how to get along with the Ayatollah. So there's a real lesson in that, right? It's like a bully kid with a really tough older brother. And once that older brother says, hey, man, I'm not fighting your fights for you anymore. You get out there and get in a scrap, you're going to have to defend yourself. It's a whole different dynamic. And, little brother doesn't talk so loud anymore at all. And that's we should just be building on that. I'm not saying it'd be utopia, but I bet if we get out of there, there's not going to be a war. We get out of there, there's going to be a bunch of peace conferences, All
right, last one. So we got another question about Afghanistan, and this subscriber wants to know why did the U.S.-backed government in Afghanistan fall so hard and so fast when the Soviet-backed government in Afghanistan lasted longer than the Soviet Union itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first question is, why did the Soviet-backed government last so long? I think probably their opposition was a lot more divided. The government that just fell was made up of the Mujahideen, many of the Mujahideen who have been against that Soviet government, and their hold on power was much more tenuous. And, I don't know. I guess I don't know enough about the Soviet puppet government there and the history of the 80s war from their point of view to really be able to compare the two. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you that the government in Kabul just had no popular support at all. And there are people who were afraid of the Taliban being worse. But essentially the government that they created was just the epitome of corruption and criminality. And the warlords that they put in power were, just absolutely resented. So the Mujahideen that America backed, so it goes like this. America backs the Mujahideen against the Soviets in the 80s, right? The Soviets leave, and the Mujahideen that we backed, they were the warlords that then fought this terrible civil war and tore the country apart. And then the communist government ended up falling, I guess, in like the end of 91 or something, 2 years after the Soviets withdrew. Might have been after that. But then, so you had Hekmatyar and Haqqani and Dostum and Massoud and all of these guys fighting over control of the country, and ruthlessly so. I mean, Hekmatyar was known as the butcher of Kabul because he would just shell the place with artillery and killed like 50,000 people. He couldn't take over the city, so he just bombed it mercilessly for years. And it was the Taliban then rose to power to put a stop to this, to the chaos of the civil war. And so then they came out of the South, and some of them had fought in the war as well, but they weren't really warlords like these other guys. And they came and basically told all the different warlords, join us or die, and killed some of them and replaced the rest and took over the country. And when they took over the country in 96, they were welcomed. And even in Kabul, which is an extremely low percentage of Pashtun population there, and it's really a Pashtun-based movement. When they got to Kabul, they were welcomed in because Massoud and his warlord friends were such criminals, and the chaos and misery of the people there were such that they were happy to see the Taliban. And the same thing happened this time. When they got to Kabul, never mind to, Lashkar Gah and Kandahar City and all these countries in the Pashtun parts of the country. But when they got to Kabul, they were welcomed in. And people said, listen, at least now it's safe to be on the street. And what they were afraid of, it wasn't that they were afraid of Taliban bombings. They were afraid of crime. And the Taliban bring law and order. Now, they're corrupt at the top, of course, and they're merciless authoritarians and all that. But part of that means they don't tolerate street crime. They don't tolerate rape, and they don't tolerate extortion and kidnapping and robbery and this kind of stuff. And so, on the sliding scale of things, they have support there. Meanwhile, who are they replacing? A bunch of criminals, a bunch of drug dealers and child rapists and murderers and warlords and extortionists who just do nothing but steal, who have, I'm your enemy written all over their face. And so the Taliban at least have, some legitimacy in the sense of people perceive that they care about not just themselves, but in actually enforcing the law. And when you live in a country that's that desperately poor and in that state of violent chaos with, kidnapping rings and whatever crime everywhere, then those are the decisions that you're left to make, I guess, as Carlin would say. And so, they have reason to prefer these guys. Now the question is, can the Taliban lord it over the Hazaras, Uzbeks, and Tajiks any better than the Hazaras, Uzbeks, and Tajiks have been able to lord it over them for the last 20 years? Because that's what this is really about, is America backing this coalition of, small minority groups of about 20% each against the Pashtuns, who are about 40%, the plurality of the population of the country. So, but not the majority of it, right? So the Taliban have now bitten off a hell of a lot, and it remains to be seen whether they'll be able to chew it. When they announced their first provisional government, it's almost all Pashtuns. I think it had one Uzbek or one Tajik or something on it. So that's just their provisional government, and we'll see what they do. I do know that there's this lady named Ashley Jackson. She's been writing for the Post and the Times and things like that lately, but she had done this study, I'm going to say like 3 years ago. I think it was about 3 years ago, where she spent all this time in Afghanistan and was talking about how after the drone bombing of Mullah Massoud, or not Massoud, pardon me, it's on the Mansour. Mullah Mansour was the leader after Mullah Omar died, and then they drone bombed him. And then the next guy that took over after him is the current top leader. His name is Haqqanzadeh. And Haqqanzadeh essentially adopted this, I don't know about brilliant, but at least more intelligent strategy of, instead of just blowing up every damn thing that the Americans create, or their allies create, just take it all over. So if they build a school, don't blow up the school. Just appoint your guy principal. And if they build a police station, don't blow up the police station. Just take it over. Make sure your guy's the chief. And same with the mayor, and same with the governor, and then move on to the next one. And another major, invention of theirs was to bring Hazaras and Uzbeks and Tajiks into the government. And Hazaras are Shiites too, so that's like an even taller order than just being a ethnic minority. But that they figured out this was the smart thing to do, was to bring people in and say, you don't have to be a Pashtun to be a Taliban. You want to join our movement? You're better off joining us now than later, and this kind of thing. And that, their government, they call the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, has been really a shadow government, or even really the actual government in much of the country for years now. And so, once it came to taking over the country, it was like a matter of snapping their fingers. It was sort of like when the Russians took Crimea. They just went outside and said, this belongs to us now. That's it. It's over. It was what the French call a coup de main. One big successful surprise attack. And in this case, almost entirely bloodless, right? They just walked right in. And I've been predicting on my show for years that they might just walk right in when it comes down to it. There might not even be an Afghan National Army to stand against them at all. And the Afghan National Army, Biden said in getting out, which I don't care what he says to get out, but he goes, listen, if these people aren't willing to fight for their country, then how long should our guys be willing to fight for it? And like, okay, that's a cute way to put it and everything, but let's get real. They weren't fighting for their country. They were fighting for our country against some people in their own country. And how long can we expect them to do that? As long as they're supported by us. And in both books, I predict that as soon as we stop supporting the Afghan government and army, they'll disintegrate and the Taliban will take over. I say it plainly in both books. It's the obvious fact. And Fool's Errand came out 4 years ago. And I said, this is how it's going to go. Page 290. In fact, somebody on Twitter said, which book should I read first? And some guy answered him and said, get Fool's Errand, start on page 290, and then start back over at the beginning again. And I was like, I wonder what's going on there. So I went and got Fool's Errand off the shelf, and I flipped to page 290, and it's like the top of the page is about how the Afghan government and army are so weak, and the bottom of the page is how the Taliban are ascendant now. It's on. In fact, it's the subchapter. The last subchapter ends with the weakness of the Kabul regime, and the new subchapter starts. And the new subchapter is Taliban back in strength, or Taliban back in force. And it's about how, it says right there, as soon as we leave, they're going to take over the place. No problem.
Now does this clairvoyance that you seem to have around the Afghanistan situation, does that extend out to say maybe the stock market? Because I'm really looking forward for a quick hit.
Well, it's a giant bubble now, and it's going to pop, but I can't tell you when. I have no idea. But I'll tell you this. I'll tell you the war in Somalia is just like the war in Afghanistan. As soon as America stops intervening in Somalia, the government in Mogadishu will fall, and I don't know if al-Shabaab will walk right in. I guess they probably will. I don't know how long they'll last. I put less money on them successfully ruling Somalia than the Taliban ruling Afghanistan. But, in Iraq War II, we're fighting for the supermajority. And so, yeah, we won. Although you might have noticed that the side we won for told us, get the hell out, we hate you, when the war was over. So you can't quite call it a victory. But they fought to expel the 20% minority and install the 60% supermajority. So, okay, that's sustainable in its own sense, in a way. But in Afghanistan and in Somalia and Yemen's different. They haven't even been able to successfully create a puppet government in Yemen. They're trying to overthrow the government in Yemen and can't. But in Somalia, the government they've created there is essentially analogous to the government in Afghanistan. It only survives on American largesse. This is the joke I meant to say on the Kennedy show that I forgot to say. I just said it was a Potemkin village, but nobody knows what Potemkin village means anymore. That's old-fashioned talk. What I meant to say was that the government in Kabul was like Solyndra or Citigroup, entirely dependent on American largesse for survival, And that would have got a laugh out of them, maybe. a slight chuckle. But anyway, so that's what I know about that.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for answering the questions. And if you're out there listening, you can join our Patreon, and you get to ask us questions to ask many of our nice guests. So go ahead and do that.
Hey, join my Patreon as long as you're on patreon.com too.
Yeah. Also join
Scott. You don't get anything
Scott's
special
Patreon.
though.
But also make sure that you are listening to the Scott Horton Show. If you want to know where I get 90% of my talking points, then listen to the Scott Horton Show and read Scott's books. Enough
skip
already.
the middleman. Go right to the source.
Just go right to the source. There's no need to listen to this podcast. Just go right to Scott Horton.
There you go.
Scott, thanks for joining us. It's always a pleasure. We are really excited to see you debate Bill Kristol in a couple of weeks. I think, Danny, are you going to be there?
Yeah, I'll be there.
We're both there. We got our tickets. We're ready to go. And we're excited to see this go down. I think a lot of people are.
Well, I'm terrified, so I hope I don't screw up.
What?
We'll see how
Don't be. You'll be fine.
I've never really been in that format before,
They really picked the smiley, like a lot of the neocons look like lagoon creatures, like Richard Pearl and
yeah,
they just look like monsters,
especially him. Yeah,
but at least Bill Kristol's kind of smiley. He has something about him. He looks kind of like, oh, he's jolly Bill Kristol.
Yeah.
So it will be interesting, but I think your arguments will definitely be much stronger, especially in light of what we just witnessed in Afghanistan.
All right, well, I better not blow it in front of all of you guys. We'll see how it goes.
Just repeatedly say page 290, and then
there you go. I told you on page 290.
Why don't we just all start chanting "War criminal, war criminal"?
Maybe
we'll start it up.
I better get my page number right if I'm going to claim that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, boys. I really appreciate you having me on a lot.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, and thanks for giving us so much time again. And I guess we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
All right, man. See you in New York.
All right.
Peace.